Okay, so after that deep dive.
Into Mayor Adams' indictment.
Yeah.
We are shifting gears this time.
Right.
From the courtroom to the world of hip-hop and high finance.
Yeah.
We're talking Sean Diddy Combs.
All right.
You sent over quite the stack of articles and notes on this one.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack Diddy's complex legacy.
Okay.
From the music to the money to those controversies that always seem to be swirling around him.
Yeah, what's fascinating about Diddy is that his career really parallels the evolution of hip-hop itself.
From the margins of the music industry to a global cultural force.
You know, you're right. I was looking back at some of your sources, and
It's wild to think about Diddy starting as an intern at Uptown Records.
wow.
To go from that to founding Bad Boy Records and
Yeah.
basically shaping the sound of 90s hip-hop.
It's incredible.
Incredible.
He didn't just ride the wave.
He created it.
Diddy's genius, if you can call it that,
Was understanding the power of image and branding.
in a way that most music executives at the time didn't.
Yeah.
Look at the artists he launched.
Biggie, Faith Evans, Usher.
Oh, yeah.
These were incredible talents, yes.
But Diddy packaged them, marketed them as larger-than-life figures.
Right.
It was about more than just the music. It was about creating a lifestyle.
You mentioned in your notes how he practically trademarks the term bad boy.
That's branding genius right there.
Absolutely.
And then he takes that same blueprint beyond music.
Clothing lines his own TV network strategic investments.
Right.
Diddy was building an empire.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because Diddy's story isn't just about rags to riches.
It's about understanding how to leverage cultural influence into serious economic power.
He was one of the first in hip-hop to really grasp that.
And he did this all while navigating incredibly turbulent times in the music industry.
Especially with the whole East Coast-West Coast rivalry.
Oh, absolutely.
There are even stories about him mediating between Death Row Records and Bad Boy.
Really?
Think about the guts that took.
Wow, that's...
It wasn't all smooth sailing, though.
And this brings us to a turning point in Diddy's story.
A moment that continues to cast a shadow, even today.
The 1999 Club New York shooting.
I remember reading about this in one of the articles you sent over.
It was all anyone could talk about.
Okay.
For those who might not remember...
Do you walk us through what happened?
Absolutely. It all went down at a club in Manhattan.
There was an altercation, shots were fired, and in the chaos, 3 people were injured.
Oh, wow.
Diddy and his protege at the time, Shine.
Were both charged in connection with the shooting.
And this wasn't just some minor incident.
You mentioned in your research that this was peak Diddy J-Lo era.
They were everywhere, one of the biggest celebrity couples on the planet.
Right.
So this trial was huge, right?
It was a media circus.
Everyone was watching to see how it would play out.
In the end, Diddy was acquitted of all charges.
Shine, however, wasn't so lucky.
He was convicted of assault and served a 10-year prison sentence.
That's wild. I mean, talk about a life-altering event,
It was a pivotal moment for both of them.
but for very different reasons.
Diddy walked away, his career seemingly unscathed.
Shine, on the other hand, had his promising career cut short.
He ended up having to rebuild his life and his music career from scratch after prison.
It makes you wonder about the lingering impact of that night,
Not just on Diddy and Shine.
but on their relationship, too.
Absolutely.
Talk about a turning point.
And it fueled a lot of the criticisms that would follow Diddy in the years to come.
Especially accusations of loyalty, of protecting himself while others face the consequences.
So we've got Diddy at this fascinating crossroads.
He's built this empire, but there's this cloud hanging over him.
What happens next?
Well, Diddy continued to build his empire, but that Club New York incident seemed to mark a shift.
In how he was perceived both within the industry and by the public.
It's interesting because on the one hand, his career seemed bulletproof.
He had this Midas touch, turning everything he touched into gold. But on the other, there were these growing whispers about the cost of that success.
Especially for the artists who were part of Bad Boy,
Exactly. And this brings us to the accusations of exploitation.
that have followed Diddy throughout his career.
One of the most high-profile examples is his very public falling out with Mace.
Who, if you remember, was a key part of Bad Boy's success in the late 90s.
You're talking about the whole Diddy won't sell me back my publishing situation, right?
I remember reading about that.
Yes.
It seemed to really blow up on social media.
It did, and it really gets to the heart of a long-standing issue.
Within the music industry, ownership.
Particularly when it comes to an artist's masters, the original recordings of their music.
You know, for those of us who aren't musicians or music executives,
Can you explain why owning those masters is such a big deal?
what difference does it make?
It's all about control and revenue.
When an artist signs a record deal, often very early in their career,
They're essentially signing away the rights to their music.
Wow.
That means the record label, in this case, Bad Boy, owns the master recordings.
And therefore controls how that music is used and profits from it.
So even though Mace wrote and performed those songs,
Diddy, as the head of Bad Boy, still had the final say.
and how they were used and how much Mace earned from them.
Precisely.
And that can be incredibly frustrating for artists.
Especially as they mature and achieve greater success.
They're often stuck with these contracts they signed early on.
Contracts that heavily favor the label.
And Mace wasn't the only one who felt this way.
In one of the articles you sent over, there's a whole section about the LOX.
Another Bad Boy group who literally went to war with Diddy over their contract.
That's right, the LOX.
They were known for their hardcore lyrics and their street credibility.
A very different vibe from some of the other Bad Boy artists.
And they felt that Diddy was trying to mold them into something they weren't.
That he was prioritizing a more commercial sound over their artistic vision.
It sounds like a classic case of creative differences.
But with huge financial stakes attached.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, these power dynamics aren't unique to Diddy or Bad Boy.
It's a systemic issue within the music industry.
There are countless stories of artists, especially young, up-and-coming artists.
Who sign deals without fully understanding the long-term implications.
It makes you wonder how much things have really changed, even with all the talk about artists' rights.
And fair contracts.
It's a complex issue.
On the one hand, you have streaming services completely disrupting the traditional music industry model.
On the other, you still have these power imbalances between artists and labels.
You mentioned earlier that this wasn't just about business, but about Diddy's reputation.
How did all of this play into the public's perception of him?
Well, it fueled this narrative of Diddy as someone who was willing to exploit others for his own gain.
Remember that Grammy speech he gave?
The one where he passionately advocated for better treatment of Black artists.
Oh, yeah. And then Mace called him out almost immediately afterwards.
It was brutal talk about awkward timing.
It really undercut Diddy's message.
It made people question his sincerity, his motives.
Here he was preaching about artists' rights.
While simultaneously being accused of holding artists hostage to these unfair contracts.
It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly. And it highlighted this disconnect between Diddy's carefully cultivated public image
as a champion for Black excellence and the realities of his business practices.
and these accusations weren't just coming from male artists.
In my research, I came across stories about Danity Kane.
The girl group Diddy formed on making the band,
Right.
who also alleged a toxic and manipulative environment at Bad Boy.
That's right. They claimed that Diddy pitted them against each other.
Controlled their image to an extreme degree and created an environment where they felt pressured.
To compromise their values for the sake of success.
So it seems like there's this recurring theme with Diddy.
This tension between his undeniable talent and drive.
And the allegations of how that drive might have come at the expense of others.
It's a pattern we see again and again.
Not just in the music industry.
In any field where ambition and power intersect,
The bigger the empire, the higher the stakes, and often.
the greater the potential for collateral damage.
And you pointed out how that 2015 incident at UCLA
Really brought that theme back into the spotlight.
Right.
I'm talking about the altercation with the football coach, right?
Right, this wasn't a contract dispute or a war of words.
This is a physical altercation.
With Diddy facing assault charges.
Right.
It felt like a flashback to that night at Club New York.
With many people asking if this was another example of Diddy losing his temper.
And using his influence to sidestep the consequences.
In one of the articles you shared, it said those charges were eventually dropped.
But the incident definitely left a mark on his public image.
Absolutely, and it's hard to separate these individual incidents.
From the broader narrative that had been building for years.
Even if you believe Diddy to be innocent in certain situations.
There's a cumulative effect. A sense that where there's smoke.
There might be fire.
And then there's that lawsuit against Revolt TV, his own network.
In your notes, you pointed out that this one really seemed to hit a nerve with a lot of people.
This wasn't just about one artist or one bad contract.
This was about the workplace culture Diddy created within his own company.
Former employees, many of them women.
Came forward with allegations of hostile work environment discrimination.
Even claims of sexual harassment.
I remember reading those accounts. It was pretty damning stuff.
It was. And while Diddy wasn't personally named in the lawsuit,
it did raise questions about his leadership.
was he aware of what was happening within his company?
Was he complicit in creating this toxic culture.
These are questions that lingered even after the lawsuit was settled.
So where does that leave us with